In the shadows of the digital age, where every app and innovation seems like a beacon of progress, lies a more sinister truth. Masayoshi Son, the force behind SoftBank, holds the strings to a vast web of tech companies. But with such power comes the potential for manipulation and control on a truly global scale. Today, the darker side of one of the world's most powerful tech investors, revealing the risks and repercussions of letting one man shape our digital destiny. And as we dive deeper today, you're going to be left wondering whether Masa's son is really the crazy genius he was made out to be, or if maybe he's just simply crazy. Masayoshi Son was born on August 11th, 1957, and from a young age, he was full of unbridled ambition. By the age of 5, he had already vowed to become Japan's wealthiest businessman, and at the age of 18, he created a plan for his next 50 years of entrepreneurship, starting with creating his own company in his 20s and ending with passing things on to the next generation when he was in his 60s. To accomplish this all would be no small feat, as he did not come from a wealthy family whose fortune he could leverage to get started. Son's family was Ainichi Koreans, ethnic Koreans that live in Japan. His grandfather came to Japan during the Japanese colonial period, and he illegally built a house on property owned by the Japanese railroads along with other Koreans. His father raised pigs and chickens as livestock, and they could at best be described as poor. However, Son's father recognized that he had to do what it took to get him and his family further in life. He started an illegal sake business, and this illicit enterprise made him enough money to be the first person in town to buy a car. With his newfound wealth, which roughly equated to lower middle class, Son's father moved the family to where his kids could attend a better school. It seems almost certain that Son inherited that ambition from his father, though he took it much further. Son was intent on becoming wealthy, and he was captivated by a book written by Den Fujita, the founder and president of McDonald's Japan. Fujita wrote several books about business, but it was his first book, published in 1972, that caught Son's attention. That book was entitled The Jewish Way of Doing Business. Son idolized Fujita and wanted to learn from him, so he began calling Fujita's office. Every day, his secretaries would answer the phone and say that Fujita was too busy to talk, but Son refused to give up. After calling about 60 times, he realized that the long-distance phone charges were starting to add up, and it would be cheaper for him to just fly to McDonald's Japan's headquarters in Tokyo and speak to Fujita in person. When the 15-year-old boy showed up at Fujita's office, he was again told by the secretaries that Fujita was too busy to speak with him. But Fujita heard Son talking to his secretary, and he was so impressed at the boy's initiative that he agreed to give Son a 15-minute meeting then and there. This changed Son's life. He asked Fujita what advice he would give to himself if he was a teenager, and Fujita's answer was simple: go to the United States to study and invest in computers. The almost 50-year-old Fujita was certain that computers were the future, so if he was a young man, that would be the best place to focus his efforts. Son took this advice to heart, and at the age of 16, he moved to San Francisco to attend high school. This transition didn't last long, however. American high school was fine, but it was going to take too long. Son's life plan involved owning a business by the time he was 20, so he couldn't waste years of his life in high school. Instead, he talked to the administration at Serramonte High School, where he was enrolled, and asked to take the exams that would be necessary to graduate and gain admission to college. Although he wasn't the most academically gifted, he was still able to pass the exams. After only 3 weeks in American high school, Son graduated and enrolled at the University of California, Berkeley. At UC Berkeley, he majored in economics while also studying computer science. He also realized that he was going to need a way to start making money, so he began asking friends and classmates if they knew of any jobs that were available. Of course, Son wasn't going to set up some minimum wage work that paid $2.65 an hour. He was looking for a job that paid $10,000 a week and required him to work no more than 5 minutes each day. These specifications undoubtedly elicited laughter from anybody he told them to, but if such a job didn't exist, then Son was going to create one himself. Every day, he set an alarm for 5 minutes and spent that time trying to come up with inventions. He would jot down hundreds of invention ideas in a notebook, looking for ideas that he could patent. With the help of some of his professors, Son was able to flesh out an idea for a pocket-sized electronic translator. He patented the invention, and the patent was sold to the electronics company Sharp for $1.7 million. But Son wanted more. He started another business importing arcade machines like Space Invaders to set up on college campuses and in bars. Arcade games had been popular in Japan for a few years, but they were just starting to take off in America with the popularity of Space Invaders. Son would order these machines on credit, paying to have them shipped by air rather than commercial freight. While this was much more expensive, it meant he could set up the machines and make the money back he spent before he actually had to pay for them. This business would end up netting Sun another $1.5 million. So, after graduating college in 1980 with a degree in economics, Sun returned to Japan. Still focused on computers, in 1981, at the age of 24, he founded SoftBank. He chose the name because his company, a software distributor, was envisioned as being a bank of software. The following year, they expanded into publishing by releasing magazines OPC and OMZ, focused on NEC and Sharp computers respectively. Business was great, with SoftBank increasing its net worth into the billions, but as always, Sun wanted more. In 1987, in an interview with Bloomberg, Sun said that his father told him as a child that he was the #1 smartest kid in Japan and that he was going to be a big shot. He went on to say, "I lose sleep thinking, why am I not #1 yet?" SoftBank went public in 1994 with a valuation of $3 billion, and this influx of capital gave Sun the ability to make some investments. Computers had already made Sun a fortune, but he was focused on where they were going next. That was the internet, and that was where Sun really was going to make a name for himself. He invested $100 million into Yahoo, founding Yahoo Japan, and that stake rose to $800 million. But that's nothing compared to his best deal, what many refer to as the greatest investment in the history of business. Sun is a highly energetic man and a bit eccentric. He's drawn to people like himself, and he became drawn to Jack Ma, the founder of Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba. When Sun met with Ma, Alibaba wasn't looking for investors. They only had 3 or 4 employees and no business plan, but Sun wanted in. He could tell from Ma's charisma, charm, and most importantly, the sparkle in his eyes, that this was a man Sun needed to do business with. In 1999, he purchased a $20 million stake in what was then a fledgling company. SoftBank's share of Alibaba would grow in value to be worth over $100 billion. By this point, SoftBank had completely abandoned its roots as a software distributor and was now a holding company focused entirely on investing. And thanks to his shrewd investments in tech startups, Sun had finally done it. He was #1, the richest man in the world, narrowly beating out Bill Gates. For 3 days, he was. Anyway. When the dot-com bubble burst, Sun personally lost $70 billion, the largest amount any person had lost at that time. While the dot-com bubble bursting severely hurt SoftBank as well, the company had diversified its investments across a myriad of different companies. Many companies went bankrupt and dissolved overnight, but the companies that survived the market crash, like Alibaba, tended to grow to unimaginable heights. Sun was down, but he was by no means out, and he was still tens of billions of dollars richer than before he had begun investing into the bubble. This became one of the fundamental drivers in how Sun perceived business. He had made some bad investments, the most high profile of which at the time were his purchase of Kingston Technology. A lot of companies he invested in failed, but it didn't matter. If you spread your money around to enough companies, eventually something would give incredible returns. Even if 70% of companies that SoftBank invested in failed and 25% maintained reasonable numbers, a single investment like Alibaba, and to a lesser extent Yahoo, would more than make up for all of the failed investments. And in the early 2000s, Sun knew what he wanted his next investment to be. He had capitalized on computers and now the internet, so what was going to be his next big thing? According to Sun, it was going to be mobile phones that were more like computers than phones, something like the BlackBerry personal digital assistants, but better. He called up Steve Jobs to pitch the idea, but Jobs told him that Apple was already in the process of developing a product like that, what became the original iPhone back in 2007. Hearing the news, Sun wanted to obtain exclusive rights to distribute the iPhone in Japan once it was released, a proposal that Jobs laughed at. Not because he didn't take Sun seriously as a businessman, but because it seemed impossible. Apple hadn't even publicly announced that they were developing the iPhone yet, and even though SoftBank had some investments in telecommunications, they didn't have a robust network that would actually be able to support the iPhone. There was no way that Apple could hand over that contract to SoftBank yet. But to Sun, this was a simple problem with a simple solution. Vodafone Japan was rapidly losing market share, and their British parent company was happy to sell off their Japanese branch of operations to SoftBank in 2006 for $15 billion. The company was renamed SoftBank Mobile, and once Apple announced the iPhone in 2007, SoftBank was able to secure the exclusive rights to distribute and service iPhones in Japan until 2011. According to Jobs, he decided to give Sun the contract essentially on the basis of, well, he asked first, didn't he? So far, it probably sounds like Masa-san is the most brilliant investor of the past 100 years. His life of investments is literally the advice people would give to themselves if they had a time machine. Sure, there were a few failures along the way, but he hit almost every major investment, like Yahoo, Alibaba, and Apple, at the perfect time to do so. But there is one name that's missing from that list that time travelers would have invested in, and that's Google. Sun did miss the boat on that one, but it wasn't for lack of trying. As a general rule, Sun is incapable of holding onto cash. Everything he and SoftBank make gets reinvested. So when he approached Jeff Bezos about investing in Google early on, he didn't have the cash flow to make a deal happen. That's something that Sun vowed would never happen again. So in 2017, he announced the idea to create what he called SoftBank's Vision Fund. It was going to be a $100 billion investment fund, 4 times larger than any technology-focused investment fund that had ever existed. The Vision Fund seemed to come out of nowhere. It was announced in 2017, and by 2018, SoftBank had raised all $100 billion that it was seeking for its fund, with much of it already having been invested. The company did contribute $28 billion to the fund themselves, with another $12 billion being raised from smaller investors like Apple. One of the 2 large investments, totaling $15 billion, came from Mubadala Investment Company based out of Abu Dhabi. But the largest investment, and the one that would go on to become a great source of controversy, came from Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund. Sun flew to Saudi Arabia, where he met with Deputy Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman shortly before he became Crown Prince. According to Sun, he convinced MBS to invest $45 billion over the course of a 45-minute meeting, or $1 billion per minute if you'd like to break it down that way. While the use of Saudi money has been controversial, the main source of the Vision Fund's controversies has actually been Sun himself. Years of making the right moves made people believe that Sun was some sort of crazy investment genius, but his use of the Vision Fund has led people to believe he might actually just be an insane gambling addict, and one that would use strong-arm tactics to get what he wanted. If a company was seeking $100 million in investments, he would want them to take $500 million instead. Sun felt that if they didn't have a plan for what they would do with that larger sum of money, then they didn't deserve the smaller one either. Sun's strategy for these startup companies he invested in was also always to go bigger and bigger. Whatever they planned to do, he would ask them if they could go 10 times bigger. Then, if they believed they could, he would want them to go 10 times bigger than that. Sun wasn't concerned with whether or not these businesses would be profitable, he just wanted them to expand and dominate the market. The idea was that because they would be backed by so much capital, it didn't matter if they were hemorrhaging money. They'd be able to outlast all of the competition by operating at a loss until they dominated the market. There would be plenty of time to figure out how to actually make these businesses profitable after they had used Sun's investment to create a de facto monopoly. But not only was Sun being ambitious in this regard, he was also ruthless. If a company tried to turn his offer down, he would threaten to invest 4 times as much money in one of their competitors. Even if they did take his money, sometimes he would still invest in a competitor just to hedge his bets. After all, Sun believed it didn't matter how many investments failed, as long as a small percentage of them paid off big. Unfortunately for Sun, his new investments weren't paying off nearly as well as his earlier ones had. One of the first and most high-profile investments by SoftBank's Vision Fund was a $4.4 billion investment in WeWork. Much like Sun's investment into Alibaba, this decision was made primarily because of WeWork CEO and co-founder Adam Neumann. Again, Sun found himself drawn in by the personality of the man at the top rather than the actual business model, and it took a devastating turn. WeWork was once valued at $47 billion, but in November of 2023, the company declared bankruptcy and their stock fell to about $1 per share. This is by no means the only failure of the Vision Fund, which has called into question Sun's credibility as a shrewd investor. When the Vision Fund was created, it was seemingly an impossible feat. The idea was created, announced, and fully funded within a year. Within another 2 years, or $100 billion had been invested into tech companies, many of which were startups. Because of this, SoftBank announced Vision Fund 2, which was going to be another $108 billion investment fund, this time focusing entirely on AI technology. Sun had correctly predicted what the hot new technological space was going to be multiple times, and he believed that AI was the next answer. There's a good chance that he was correct about that as well. But in 2019, when Vision Fund 2 was announced, investors weren't excited. The companies that SoftBank's original Vision Fund invested in were mostly performing poorly. People were losing faith in SoftBank and in Sun, and the only money for the second Vision Fund was the $30 billion that SoftBank put into it themselves. While this was a failure on top of a failure, it allowed them to try to masquerade it all as a success. The total value of the funds was being reported as a combined sum, so the number was inflated by the tens of billions of additional dollars that SoftBank had dumped into the second fund. When it was announced that in 2021 the funds were worth a combined $154 billion, that made it sound like their investments had increased by 50% in just a couple of years. But that wasn't the case at all. And it was only their investment in South Korea's Coupang that was saving them from disaster. Not only were most of the companies that Sun invested in doomed to failure from the start, but those that weren't doomed happened to be particularly susceptible to the COVID pandemic. In particular, nearly a quarter of the Vision Fund had been invested in rideshare apps, all of which suffered disastrous losses when the world went into lockdown. The Vision Fund posted losses in the tens of billions, destroying investor confidence. Despite Sun's self-proclaimed ability to see the future, for years he had been the one trying to shape the future of technology. By utilizing his investment capital, he has the ability to choose which companies will thrive and which will fail. Or at least, that's the goal. He can't force a company to succeed, but he can force its competitors to all fail by allowing the company of his choice to survive extended periods of financial loss while driving the competition out of business. Now, it's impossible to know for sure what the future will hold, but it's quite possible that Masa Son is going to represent an even more dangerous and disruptive force in tech company investments moving forward. Not only has the Vision Fund been marked by repeated failure, but Sun's entire ability to pick investments has been called into question. He made it big by betting on the twinkle in Jack Ma's eye, but not all charismatic individuals can run a successful business. Sun was similarly drawn into WeWork by Adam Neumann, which was a colossal failure. He was similarly drawn in by FTX's Sam Bankman-Fried and the company's promise of easy and fast money, the sort of thing that a lifelong venture capitalist would know is definitely real. More recently, they invested in the failed app IRL, who allegedly sought investor capital by reporting a user base that was 95% fake accounts. While IRL's alleged fraud has not yet been proven in court, the last two examples suggest that Sun's attraction towards charismatic individuals rather than sound business plans may make him especially susceptible to con men. SoftBank has had to take drastic measures to restore customer confidence and to increase their capital. One such drastic measure was a massive buyout of both stocks and call options on the New York Stock Exchange, totaling nearly $10 billion. But because the options are tied to higher amounts of shares, the $4 billion investment in options had the same effect that a $50 billion investment into stocks would have given. This happened at the same time that the Nasdaq and S&P 500 shot to record highs and prompted an SEC investigation. While there was speculation that this may have been an illegal pump-and-dump scheme to make SoftBank some quick cash, no conclusive evidence could be found, and neither Sun nor SoftBank were accused of any wrongdoing. Another much more shocking way that Sun and SoftBank chose to increase their cash flow was selling off their stake in Alibaba, the original investment that made them the company they are today. The Vision Fund has also stopped making investments for the past couple of quarters in an attempt to restore confidence and prevent losses from future investments. While the company as a whole seems to be trying to course correct, Sun doesn't seem thrilled with the current plans. In 2022, he began quietly buying back shares of the company, increasing his personal stake to 34%. Japanese law grants him additional rights as a decision maker by owning more than a third of the company, but as always, that's not enough for Sun. There's speculation that he's edging towards a buyout and taking the company private. Masa Son was once the wealthiest man in the world, albeit briefly, before losing $70 billion, the largest loss of any individual until Elon Musk. He was seen as a prophet of investment, with a clairvoyant sense of what direction the technological world was going to head in. Now, his reputation has been all but destroyed by a string of poor decisions lasting over a decade, and his decision-making has become seemingly more erratic. But if Sun is able to buy back enough shares to take a controlling interest over SoftBank, the company he founded, it would give him unilateral control over all of their investment capital. A seemingly desperate man, unafraid of gambling tens of billions, could exert a massive amount of influence and control over the future of technology. And if Sun is once again losing sleep at night while asking himself, why am I still not number one? There's no telling what he might attempt in order to regain his former glory.